A blind date at a caf. The girl couldn't pay. But the Millionaire CEO smiled. It's on me. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The soft hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware filled the cozy caf on a rainy afternoon in downtown Seattle. The warm amber lights reflected off polished cups, and the smell of espresso mixed with the faint sweetness of vanilla syrup. At a small corner table, a young woman named Lila Bennett checked her phone for the third time. Her palms were sweaty, her heartbeat unsteady. Blind date, table 12, she murmured under her breath. Her best friend Mia had convinced her this would be different, that she deserved a good man after years of working double shifts as a barista and taking care of her sick mom. Adjusting the strap of her thrifted dress, she scanned the tables until her eyes landed on a man sitting alone near the window. He looked calm, confident, in a crisp navy shirt and tailored coat, scrolling through something on his phone. That must be him, she thought, taking a deep breath before walking over. Hi, you must be Ethan, right? I'm Lila, she said with an awkward smile. The man looked up, slightly startled. For a second, his sharp gray eyes flickered with surprise, then softened. Adrian Cole had been waiting for a business associate who'd just texted to cancel, but something about this nervous girl standing before him stopped him from correcting her. Maybe it was the way her voice trembled when she spoke, or how her hair curled damply from the rain. Either way, he found himself smiling back. Right, Ethan. Nice to meet you, Lila, he said, playing along. She sighed in relief and sat down, clutching the edge of her menu like a life raft. Blind dates are so awkward, right? Mia said you're a little quiet, but that's okay. I can talk enough for both of us. Adrian chuckled softly. I can see that. The conversation stumbled at first, but soon Lila's genuine warmth began to fill the space. She told him about her late-night shifts, how she'd sketch customers between coffee orders, her dream of opening a caf gallery someday. You draw? Adrian asked, curiosity lacing his tone. Yeah, she said, pulling a small sketchbook from her bag. It's nothing special. Just faces I see every day. She flipped to a page of baristas laughing, an old couple holding hands, a stray cat outside the window. He leaned closer, genuinely impressed. You have an eye for stories, he said quietly. I just see people, she replied, shrugging. Maybe that's my superpower. The waitress came by, placing 2 cups on the table. Lila reached for her purse and froze. Her face went pale. Oh no, my wallet. I swear I had it. She fumbled through her bag, panic rising. I'm so sorry. This is so embarrassing. Adrian raised a hand gently. It's okay. Really. His smile was easy, calm, the kind that made the room feel warmer. It's on me. Her cheeks burned crimson. No, I can't let you already did, he interrupted softly. You sat here and made my day better than any meeting could have. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped gently against the window, and Lila found herself smiling, uncertain why this stranger's kindness hit her so deeply. She didn't know his name wasn't Ethan, and he didn't know that her sketchbook now lying open on the table would one day hang framed in a gallery he'd build for her. But for now, it was just 2 people. One small mistake, and the quiet beginning of something that felt like fate. That night the rain had stopped, but the city still glistened under 1,000 streetlights. Lila walked home clutching her sketchbook tight against her chest. Her shoes were soaked through, and the faint echo of Adrian's voice. It's on me kept replaying in her mind. She could not decide if she felt grateful or humiliated. Inside her small apartment above a laundromat, the heater rattled like an old typewriter. Her mother was already asleep in the next room, soft breathing steady under thin blankets. Lila tiptoed into the kitchenette, poured herself a glass of tap water, and leaned against the counter. Her reflection in the window looked tired but somehow lighter. She whispered to herself, it was just coffee, not destiny. But deep down, she knew something about that stranger's calm gray eyes had stayed with her. The next morning came too soon. The alarm buzzed at 6 a.m., and the scent of detergent from downstairs filled the room. Lila pulled on her caf uniform, brushed her hair into a messy ponytail, and left for work. The morning rush was already building when she arrived at Bean District Caf. The bell above the door jingled constantly, Espresso machines hissed like steam trains, and laughter echoed from the tables. Lila wiped the counter, forcing herself to focus on orders. Large caramel latte, extra whip, iced Americano with soy, blueberry muffin, please. Her hands moved automatically while her mind drifted back to that smile, the quiet way he said, "You already did." She scolded herself under her breath. He was probably just being polite. People like him did not remember girls like her. Around noon, the door opened again, and a familiar warmth spread through the caf. She looked up and froze. Adrian was standing at the counter, dressed in the same navy coat, the faintest trace of rain on his shoulders. For a split second, neither of them moved. "Hi," he said finally, his tone casual. "Small black coffee. To go." Lila fumbled with the register. "Sure, that will be $3.25. He handed her a bill and waited as she poured the coffee. She could feel his eyes on her, steady but kind. When she turned back to hand him the cup, she noticed something, a small folded piece of paper beneath the bill. "Have a good day," he said, then walked out into the drizzle before she could reply. Lila waited until the line cleared, then unfolded the note. It said, "Next time, coffee is on me again. A." She pressed the paper to her chest, fighting a smile she could not hide. Days passed, and he returned again and again. Always the same order. Always that quiet smile. They talked in small fragments between customers. About the weather, about art, about how the city never slept. He never mentioned his last name, and she never asked. The routine became their secret rhythm. After closing, Lila would sit by the window sketching customers who came and went. But sometimes she drew him his profile, his hands around the cup, the calm behind his eyes. Mia teased her, saying, "You sure he is not your mysterious prince?" Lila rolled her eyes, laughing. "Please, he probably has a girlfriend, or 10. But even she could not hide the way her heart lifted whenever the doorbell chimed. One evening, when the rain came down harder than ever, Adrian stayed instead of ordering to go. The caf was nearly empty, just the hum of the espresso machine and the glow of streetlights through wet glass. "You always draw in that book," he said, nodding to her sketchpad. "Do you ever show anyone?" She shook her head shyly. "Only the people who accidentally end up in it." He smiled. "Then I am honored." For the first time, she laughed freely. The world outside faded, and for that small slice of time, they were just two people in the same storm, both pretending not to notice that destiny had quietly taken a seat at their table. By the end of the week, Adrian's visits had become the quiet highlight of Lila's days. He never stayed long, never said too much, but his presence made the air softer somehow. One afternoon, after a long rush of customers, she found a small paper bag left on the counter. Inside was a box of new colored pencils and a note that read, "For the artist who sees beauty in coffee cups, A." Her heart swelled with surprise. Nobody had ever noticed her sketches before, much less encouraged them. That evening, she sat by the window of her apartment, coloring a scene of the caf warm lights, a man in a navy coat, a girl smiling behind the counter. Her mother peeked from the door, tired but curious. "Someone's making you smile again," she teased gently. Lila blushed, pretending to focus on her drawing. "He is just a customer, Mom. Nothing serious." But even as she said it, she felt that flicker of something more. Across town, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse, city lights glittering far below. The silence of the high-rise apartment felt heavier tonight. He poured himself a glass of water, set it down untouched, and glanced at the sketch Lila had given him as a joke, a quick pencil portrait of him holding a coffee cup. It was rough, imperfect, but full of life. He could almost hear her laugh in the lines she drew. He had spent years surrounded by elegance and noise, but rarely by sincerity. And now he found himself thinking about a girl who lived above a laundromat and still smiled like sunlight through rain. The next morning, Lila arrived early to the caf to open up. The rain had returned, painting the windows in thin silver streaks. As she flipped the open sign, she saw Adrian standing outside, holding an umbrella big enough for two. "Morning," he said, offering it to her. "Looks like another storm. Seattle's favorite season," she joked, unlocking the door. He laughed softly. "Mind if I help you set up? I have some time before work." She wanted to say yes, but hesitated. "You? Setting up a caf?" "I make excellent foam art," he said with mock seriousness. She rolled her eyes, but let him in. Together, they moved chairs, wiped tables, and restocked the pastry case. It was simple, domestic even, and it made her feel unexpectedly happy. When they finished, she poured 2 coffees and gestured toward the window seat. "You earned this." "Thank you," he said, taking a sip. "So you really work here every day?" "Every day, and most nights someone has to pay the bills. Do you ever rest?" "Not really, but drawing helps." "What would you draw right now?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe this. The quiet before people rush in. The way everything feels still, like the city is holding its breath." He smiled, eyes reflecting the glow from the street outside. "You make the ordinary sound magical." She looked down at her cup, cheeks warm. "Maybe I just choose to see it that way." Time slipped by unnoticed until the first customers arrived, breaking the spell. He stood, placing a few bills on the counter. "Keep the change," he said, "and maybe save me a seat for tomorrow." She grinned. "Only if you promise to bring your foam art skills." He walked out into the rain, the bell above the door chiming behind him. And somewhere deep down, both of them sensed that this was not just coincidence, it was the beginning of something neither dared to name yet. 2 weeks later, the caf felt different. The regulars noticed it too, the way Lila smiled more often, the faint sparkle in her eyes when the doorbell chimed. Adrian had become part of the daily rhythm, always arriving mid-morning, always sitting at the same window seat with a black coffee and a small smile that said more than words ever could. They talked about little things, the color of the sky, her favorite sketches, the way people told stories through gestures. But behind those easy moments, something deeper was beginning to form, quiet and unspoken. One evening after closing time, the rain poured harder than usual, trapping her inside as thunder rolled through the streets. She was wiping down the counter when she heard a knock. Through the fogged window, Adrian stood holding a paper bag and that same oversized umbrella. "You are closed," she said, opening the door a crack, but he smiled. "I figured, but I thought you might not have eaten yet." Inside the bag was a takeout box, still warm. "Chicken pot pie," he said. "You mentioned once your mom used to make it." She blinked, taken aback that he remembered something so small. They sat together at the corner table while the storm raged outside. For a while, the only sound was rain against glass. "You never talk about yourself," she said gently. "What do you do exactly, Mr. Mystery Foam Artist?" He hesitated for a second, then shrugged. "I work in tech, mostly management." "So like an office job?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "Something like that," he replied. "A lot of numbers and meetings. You would find it boring." "I doubt that," she said softly, looking at him over the rim of her cup. His gaze lingered on her face, warm but guarded. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he was Adrian Cole, founder and CEO of Arcturus Technologies, that the caf they sat in could fit inside the lobby of his company headquarters. But the thought of her looking at him differently stopped him. For the first time in his life, he wanted to be seen for something other than his last name. When the storm eased, he offered to walk her home. The streets shimmered under streetlights, puddles glowing gold. "You do not have to," she said, hugging her sketchbook close. "I insist," he replied. Halfway to her apartment, they stopped under the awning of a closed bookstore. The air smelled like wet pavement and coffee grounds. "You are not like anyone I know," she said, her voice barely audible. "Most people do not notice small things. You do." "Maybe I just pay attention to what matters," he said. Her heart skipped. For a second, she thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he glanced at her sketchbook. "Do you draw me again?" "Maybe," she teased. "Depends if you tip well." They both laughed, and something inside them settled into place, something real. When they reached her building, he paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Thank you for the company," he said. "You make the world feel slower." She smiled. "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Maybe it is because you deserve nice things, Lila." The next morning, she found a small envelope taped to the caf door. Inside was a ticket to the annual City Art Gala, one of the biggest events of the year. A handwritten note read, "Go see what your dreams look like under bright lights." Her breath caught. She had always wanted to see that exhibition, but the tickets were too expensive. Now one lay in her hands. She looked out at the gray sky, the city already waking, and whispered, "What are you not telling me, Adrian?" Somewhere across town, in a high-rise office overlooking the skyline, Adrian Cole stared at his reflection in the glass. Tomorrow night he would be on stage at that same gala, accepting an award for innovation. And he knew she would be there, unaware that the man sitting in her café every morning was the very millionaire she was about to see under the spotlight. The night of the gala arrived with a chill wind sweeping through the streets of downtown Seattle. Lila stood outside the grand glass building, her hands trembling as she clutched the single invitation that had come without explanation. She had borrowed a simple blue dress from her friend Mia and tied her hair back in a loose knot. The bright lights spilling from the ballroom made her feel both excited and out of place. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself as she stepped inside. The space was magnificent crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and music soft enough to make conversation sound elegant. Guests in designer gowns floated by with champagne flutes and polite laughter. Lila found a quiet corner, holding her clutch tight, wondering if would be here. She thought maybe she would see him among the crowd, perhaps smiling that same quiet smile. But the man she knew as Adrian, the one who drank black coffee and listened to her dreams, was nowhere to be seen. Then the lights dimmed, and the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Adrian Cole, CEO of Arcturus Technologies." The applause roared through the room. Lila froze. Her breath hitched as a tall man in a sleek tuxedo walked onto the stage, the same gray eyes, the same calm smile. But this Adrian was different. The stranger in the spotlight was confident, composed, and far from the humble man who had wiped tables with her at the café. Her fingers went cold as realization flooded in. The man who had sat across from her, the man who had said, "It's on me," was a millionaire, the very kind of person she had promised herself never to depend on. The crowd faded into a blur. She barely heard his speech about innovation and empathy and technology. Every word felt like a lie now. When the applause ended, she slipped out quietly, her heels clicking too fast against the marble. The cold night air hit her lungs as she stepped outside, fighting tears. Moments later, she heard his voice behind her. "Lila, wait." She stopped, turning to see him jog down the steps, his bow tie slightly undone. "You were not supposed to find out this way," he said, breathless. "I wanted to tell you—" "Tell me what?" she interrupted, her voice shaking. "That you lied? That all this time you were testing me, playing some rich man's experiment?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "It was never like that. I just wanted to. You wanted to feel normal for a while," she snapped. "You wanted to be the good guy in someone else's story." He fell silent, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I did not want my world to change the way you saw me." "But it did," she whispered. "You think I am angry because you are rich?" "No, Adrian. I am angry because you did not trust me with the truth." The rain began to fall again, gentle at first, then harder, mixing with the tears she refused to wipe. "I have spent my whole life proving that honesty matters more than status," she said, stepping back. "And now I do not even know which version of you I met." "Lila, please," he said. But she was already turning away, clutching her sketchbook against her chest like a shield. She walked until the lights of the gala blurred into the rain, leaving him standing there alone on the steps. That night, back in her apartment, she tore the envelope that had carried the invitation and stared at her drawings of him. The man at the café, the one who listened and laughed, still looked real. The one under the spotlight felt like a stranger. She closed her sketchbook, whispered, "Maybe that was all it ever was," and let the sound of the storm fill the silence. Across town, Adrian sat in his penthouse, the same sketch she had given him resting on the table beside a cold cup of coffee. For the first time in years, the city below looked endless, and he had never felt smaller. Days passed after the gala, but for Lila, they felt like years. She went to work as usual, smiling at customers, serving coffee, pretending everything was fine. Yet every time the doorbell chimed, her heart would skip, expecting to see him walk in again. He never did. The chair by the window stayed empty, and the little folded notes she used to find under coffee cups were gone. Mia noticed the change. "You look like someone stole your sunshine," she said one morning as they restocked the pastry shelf. Lila tried to laugh it off, just tired. But her voice cracked, betraying her. That night after closing, she sat at the counter sketching aimlessly. Every page turned into the same face, the man who had lied, but whose kindness still lingered in every line she drew. She finally closed the sketchbook and whispered to herself, "You cannot draw someone out of your heart." Across town, Adrian sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. The city glittered below like a field of stars. but none of it felt bright anymore. His assistant had placed a dozen reports on his desk, but all he could see was her expression at the gala, hurt, betrayed, distant. For the first time, his own success felt meaningless. He had built an empire that touched the world but had failed to hold on to the one person who saw him as human. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the original note he had written her at the café. "Next time, coffee is on me again," he smiled sadly. "I should have just told you who I was." The following week, he visited the café quietly during closing hours. Through the glass door, he saw her cleaning the tables, her hair tied back, humming softly. For a moment he almost knocked, but he stopped, watching her laugh with Mia as they stacked chairs. It was her laughter that broke him. He turned and walked away into the drizzle, realizing that apologies meant little without trust. The next morning, Lila arrived to find an envelope taped to the café door again. Her stomach tightened as she pulled it free. Inside was not a note, but a photograph, a picture of a blank storefront with a for lease sign and a key taped to the corner. Beneath it, in the same handwriting she knew too well, were the words, "Every dream deserves to be seen. Open Hands Gallery. Yours if you still believe." Her fingers trembled as she read it. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to throw it away and never look back. But the other part, the one that still remembered his gentle smile and quiet sincerity, whispered that maybe this was not manipulation. Maybe it was redemption. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. That evening, she took the bus to the address written on the back. It was a small brick building near the harbor, the kind of place where sunlight would pour through tall windows during the day. Inside, the walls were bare, but the space felt alive with possibility. She ran her fingers over the dusty counter, imagining art on the walls, laughter, music, coffee, and sketches her world made visible. She turned to leave but froze when she saw him standing by the doorway, no suit this time, just a gray sweater and jeans. "You came," he said softly. She hesitated, every instinct telling her to run, but something in his voice stopped her. "Why did you do this?" she asked quietly. "Because you taught me that real things cannot be bought," he said. "You showed me that connection does not need titles or money. I am not here to fix what I broke with gifts. I am here because I believe in your dream, even if you never forgive me." For a long moment, silence filled the space between them. Then Lila said, "You cannot buy forgiveness, Adrian." "I am not trying to," he replied gently. "I am trying to earn it." She looked down at the key still in her hand, her heart pounding in confusion. Without another word, she placed it on the counter and walked past him into the night, leaving him standing there, unsure if hope was still possible. For the next several days, the small key sat untouched on Lila's kitchen counter, catching the morning light like a silent question she was not ready to answer. Each time she passed by, she told herself it was just another one of his rich man gestures, another reminder of the distance between their worlds. But deep down, a softer voice whispered something else, something she did not want to hear. What if he truly meant it? The café went on as usual, though she moved through her shifts like a shadow of herself. Her smile still appeared, but it did not reach her eyes. One slow afternoon, Mia leaned against the counter and said, "You know, some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to believe in them like that." Lila looked up, startled. "You mean buy them a building?" Mia shook her head. "No, believe in their dream, Lila. Not everyone does that without expecting something back." That night, Lila went home to find her mother sitting at the table, reading a letter from the clinic. The expression on her face was tired but calm. "The hospital extended my payment plan," her mother said softly. "Someone called and arranged it, said it was anonymous." Lila froze. She knew immediately who it was. Anger rose first. How dare he interfere? But then came something else, an ache she could not name. Later that evening, she walked to the harbor, where the lights shimmered across the water and the air smelled of salt and rain. She found herself standing in front of the brick building again, the one with the empty windows and the keyhole, waiting for her answer. She turned the key slowly, and the door creaked open. The space looked just as she remembered: bare walls, wide floor, a blank canvas. But now there was something new, a single light flickering from a corner lamp, and a stack of blank canvases leaning against the wall with a note taped to one of them. It said, "No names, no logos, just your art." Her breath caught. "Adrian," she whispered, though she knew he was not there. She spent the next hour walking through the room, running her fingers over the cool plaster walls. It was quiet except for the distant sound of waves. Slowly, she began to imagine how it could look: paintings, photographs, people laughing, music soft in the background. Her dream alive. Yet the thought of forgiving him still felt impossible. The next morning, while she brewed coffee, Mia burst into the café waving her phone. "Lila, you need to see this," she said, breathless. On the screen was a video clip from a business conference. Adrian Cole was standing on stage again, but this time his tone was different. "We often measure success in numbers and buildings," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "But I recently learned that the most valuable investment a person can make is in another person's dream. Sometimes the greatest innovation is kindness." The audience applauded, but Lila could barely hear them. Her eyes stung. He had not mentioned her name, but she knew. The words were his way of saying what his pride never could. That night, after closing, she went back to the gallery space once more. This time she brought her sketchbook, a handful of old drawings, and a small portable lamp. She set them on a table, then sat on the floor and began sketching quietly. For the first time in weeks, her hands felt steady. As she drew, she realized forgiveness did not always arrive like thunder or grand apologies. Sometimes it came quietly, like pencil strokes on paper. She looked around the empty room and whispered, "Maybe it is time to stop running." Outside, the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, and somewhere across the city, Adrian looked out his window at the same night sky, unaware that the woman who had once turned away had finally unlocked the door to both her dream and maybe, just maybe, a second chance. The following month moved like a quiet sunrise over the city. The empty brick building by the harbor slowly began to change, not through grand construction crews or expensive designers, but through Lila's own hands and the help of a few friends. Every evening after her caf shift, she returned there with a cup of coffee in one hand and her sketchbook in the other. The smell of paint filled the air, and dust danced in the golden light that streamed through the tall windows. She had chosen a name for the place, the Art of Lila, and she smiled every time she whispered it aloud. For the first time in years, her dream was no longer something she talked about in between orders. It was something she could touch. One morning, as she pinned a small drawing to the wall, she noticed an envelope on the floor near the entrance. There was no name, just the same careful handwriting she knew by heart. Inside was a single line that read, "If you ever decide to open your doors, I would love to see what you created." Beneath it was a small donation receipt made out to the city's community art fund. He had not signed his name, but he did not need to. She felt her heart ache and soften all at once. Over the next few weeks, she worked harder than ever. Volunteers came from the neighborhood: artists, students, old friends, people she had served coffee to for years. The small gallery glowed like a lantern in the night. Lila moved through the crowd, thanking people, answering questions, feeling light for the first time in months. And then, as she turned toward the doorway, she froze. Adrian was standing there, dressed simply, holding a single sunflower, the same flower she had drawn on the very first page of her sketchbook years ago. For a moment the noise of the room faded away. He stepped forward slowly, his expression careful, humble. "You really did it," he said softly. "It is beautiful." Lila took a deep breath. "I told you I would, even without your money." He nodded. "I never doubted you." There was no arrogance in his voice this time, no hint of the man from the gala, only sincerity. "I came tonight not as a guest," he said. "I came to return something." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, the sketch she had once drawn of him at the caf, now framed in a small wooden border. "You left this part of your story unfinished," he said. "I think it belongs here." She looked at the sketch, her throat tightening. "You kept it all this time?" "Every day," he replied. "It reminded me who I was before the suits and titles." She stood in silence for a moment, the hum of conversation filling the space between them. Then she took the sketch gently and hung it on a blank section of the wall near the entrance. The title card beneath it read, "Table 9, the best mistake I ever made." When she turned back to him, her eyes shimmered with tears. "You did not have to come," she whispered. "I did," he said, "because I wanted to see the place where I finally learned what love actually means." Around them, the gallery buzzed with life. But for that moment, it was just the two of them, standing amid the art that had brought them together and torn them apart, now stitching something new between them. She smiled faintly and said, "Maybe every wrong turn leads somewhere right, after all." He smiled back, and for the first time in a long while, they both felt like they had found home. The night of the gallery opening became the turning point neither of them had planned but both had needed. When the last guests left and the laughter faded into the hum of the harbor outside, Lila found herself standing beside Adrian in the quiet glow of the empty space. The walls around them held every step of their story drawings, photographs, tiny fragments of kindness turned into art. She looked at the framed sketch he had returned and whispered, "I never thought my biggest mistake would turn into something this beautiful." Adrian smiled, his voice low and warm. Maybe it was never a mistake. Maybe it was just how fate wanted us to meet. She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the soft lights above. "You really think fate uses spilled coffee and wrong tables?" "It used us," he said gently, "and it worked." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that feels like forgiveness. For the first time since that rainy day months ago, there was no tension between them, only peace. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Before you say anything," he said quickly, "this is not about money or guilt or grand gestures. It is about truth." Lila froze, her breath catching. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring, its design delicate, shaped like a tiny intertwined leaf. "I do not want to erase the past," he continued, "because it brought us here. I only want a chance to build something honest, something real. Not CEO and waitress. Just Adrian and Lila." She looked down at the ring, her heart trembling. "You are not buying forgiveness," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I am asking for partnership." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she laughed softly. "You really are terrible at coffee dates," he smiled. "Then maybe we should start with something stronger." She took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. "All right, Adrian Cole. But if this goes wrong, I am charging double for coffee." "Deal," he said, his grin widening. He slipped the ring gently onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the harbor, painting the gallery in gold. Lila stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake. Behind her, Adrian adjusted a frame on the wall, pretending to focus but sneaking glances at her reflection. "You know," she said, turning to him, "I used to think happiness was something big, something you had to chase. And now?" he asked. "Now I think it is something small," she said softly. "Like 2 cups of coffee, a sketchbook, and someone who stays." He walked over, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Then I plan to stay for a very long time." Months later, the Art of Lila became one of the most beloved community galleries in the city. It was more than a place to show paintings. It was a space where stories met students, artists, dreamers, all drawn by the promise that art could change lives. And every morning, before opening the doors, Lila would wipe the counter, turn the sign, and glance at the framed sketch labeled Table 9, the best mistake I ever made. On some days, she caught Adrian watching her from the doorway, still holding that same black coffee, still smiling the same way he did on the day they met. "You ready?" he would ask. "Always," she would answer. The camera of memory pulled back to the harbor glinting under the sun, the laughter from the gallery spilling out onto the street. Their story had begun with a misunderstanding, but it ended with truth, a reminder that love, when honest, needs no perfection, only courage. And as the screen faded to black, her voice lingered softly. "Maybe the best things in life do not happen by design. Maybe they happen by accident, by fate, and maybe, just maybe, they start with a cup of coffee and the words, 'It is on me.'"